Hey, Rich. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate you spending some time with me, and you come joining us from the company Vega Factor. We're going to find out, I guess, a little bit about you. We're going to talk a little bit about the Prime to Perform book, and I'm looking forward to this interview a lot. We talked a couple of times, and we're I want to hear more about this, what you guys are doing over at Vega Factor. So, looking forward to it. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I'll get started. And when I do these interviews, I typically try to look over the LinkedIn profiles because that's about the best information I have sometimes. And you and I, um, like some of the people I've actually done these podcasts with, really never met in person. We've met through social media, which I think is kind of cool. I really like to bring that out to my viewers and the people that are watching this. That social media, it's social. And if you really leverage the business side of social media, it's really interesting the connections you can make through LinkedIn. And I've made some really good connections. I'm hoping to get through some more people that I've met strictly over LinkedIn that we've never had any business relationships with. And so it's exciting to have one of these interviews. But when I looked over your profile, I noticed that you started your career, your education. It said something about transforming supply chain. Maybe you can talk about, I think it was productivity too. Tell me a little bit about your career journey so we can get a background on Rich.
Yeah, happy to, Dave. And I'll plant the seed before I kind of get into that a little bit. But I've kind of always been obsessed with performance, playing a lot of sports and basketball as a kid. So I studied industrial engineering in college, kind of very focused on how do we drive a lot of efficiency and high performance. And I remember at the end of college, I had a big pull towards Wall Street and also curiosity about consulting. And simply for consulting, it was the ability to use some analytical skills. I love the kind of project orientation approach in consulting, and a chance to use some people skills. So I went into consulting, joined Kurt Salmon Associates out of school, and we did the focus of Kurt Salmon was a lot around consumer retail companies. So how to essentially drive improvements in their supply chain. A lot of the work I did earlier in my career was in distribution centers, leading project teams doing productivity improvement projects in distribution centers. So that's really where I started. Kind of doing some interesting work that led to some kind of broader supply chain transformation type work a little bit later. But that was the beginning of my journey.
Awesome. Yeah, I find myself driven a lot by productivity as well. Um, it's not always healthy. I think sometimes it's like a little bit of an OCD thing. You think, well, if we did it this way and if we did it this way, and I think that, and we're going to get into the book a little bit, so I don't want to jump ahead, but I've sort of started to see where that can actually be a negative if you don't do it right. So it's kind of interesting. So
I'm laughing.
you,
Dave. My brain works similarly. I think about, okay, how could I put away the dishes in the most effective way into my shelves? Like that. That's in me. So,
yeah, I saw this is a totally divergence, but I saw there was a guy I want to say it was in the early 1900s, and he was one of the first engineers that started like really looking at that. I can't think of his name, but he actually used, I think, the camera to watch people, and I think he was actually doing it at home first to see, like what you just said, to see the steps that were made
mhm.
in the kitchen, map them out, and then determine like what would be the more efficient way to actually get things done. And
Yes.
then he started some of that, pioneered some of that. Man, I wish I could think of the guy's name, but I saw it on a YouTube video, of
Right.
course. But
Yeah.
I'll have to look that one up. But yeah, it is amazing. I mean, it seems like that's the creativity piece. We'll probably get into that a little bit too. So you did some coaching too. I think before the Vega Factor, you kind of got into a
Yeah.
little bit of coaching.
Yeah, I would say, the first clunk of my career, starting with that productivity work for retail consumer product companies, supply chain work, implementing change in operational environments, it kind of stoked in me this piece of, really want to help people thrive in workplaces, kind of stemming back to my, sports as a child growing up. And I kept seeing more just opportunities in the workplace, like just seeing so much untapped potential. And like, there's such a, understandable focus on like, hey, let's deliver shareholder value for our shareholders. Let's, really unlock the, great experiences and our people. let's have great customer experiences, but yet so much of most companies get in their own way around that. So I made a pivot now, maybe 15 years ago. I said I want to focus more on culture as a way to help unlock kind of the next level of productivity and employee experiences in the workplace. So that's where I started, and it was kind of in the tail end of one of my roles at Evolve Partners, where as part of leading large operational excellence programs, we incorporated a lot of leadership development and coaching work. So I'm just like, this is a way to kind of take that productivity to the next level. So when I joined Great Place to Work, we worked on building out their culture transformation practice, with part of that being really how to leverage executive teams and coach them to deliver higher performance and better experiences for their organization. So that was kind of part of my pivot to focus on culture, which I've since developed a strong love-hate with that frame. But that's kind of what kind of leaned more into doing some coaching work and building that in. You're laughing.
Yeah.
You're laughing. Yeah.
I'm laughing because I know that same struggle, because having been in a couple of large companies where culture is it's a the word culture becomes a buzz term. Um, I've noticed a fellow, as a frontline worker, right? I'm not a man. I actually haven't managed people in any of these recent careers I've had, but as a frontline worker, my peers talk to me, and people start to resent the culture message sometimes. There's a lot of, and we could sort of dig into this too as we go through. But there's a lot of resentment sometimes, I think, with any kind of consulting that happens at a management level. And people, I've heard this term like, oh, well, what's the new consultant of the year? Now we have a new
Yeah.
consultant, there's new something being dished out. And so there's distrust of what's coming from the culture message sometimes. There's and then the other thing that I struggle with, and again, I'm sorry for going
Let's
sideways
go
here a
there.
little bit,
It's more fun.
but
More fun to go off the road.
the you know it's just, it feels like when the message is delivered to managers, and even people that go through training, and this doesn't have to be culture training. I went through some different types of training in my last employer, and invariably everyone takes what, I guess, what the simplest concept that they can remember from that training,
Yeah.
like one, let's say 1 to 2%,
Yes.
and then they magnify that 1 to 2%, and it becomes the focal point.
Yep.
And instead of like understanding the entire message that we received, we end up focusing on this one thing, like, hey, let's use more pictures in PowerPoint.
Right.
And it's like, well, that was like, a side point. That wasn't like the main thing we learned in this thing. It was about communication and how pictures can be better sometimes, but that wasn't the main thing. It was about preparation and, really getting the mess figuring out how to deliver the message the correct way. So it's just funny, and I find the same thing happening with culture too sometimes, and even some of the stuff you guys are working on. um you know Sometimes the frontline employees, by the time they get it, the message is skewed. It's not exactly what it should be. So when
Happens
you said the love-hate relationship, I figure it's probably something like that, right? Because you know
100%. And it's also this, it's this piece where people link to, oh, it's the soft stuff, right? Or exactly what you described, Dave, is people kind of take a component. And I find a lot of times leaders at all levels, like, get very binary in their thinking. Oh, this is the magic piece. If we just give people a lot of recognition, that will solve all our ills because that was the top thing on our survey this year, right? And there's
uh-huh
so many things wrong with that. Where if we teach these workplace values and train people on them, they will like have like perfect behaviors that in our organization. And as I kind of think about what we're just talking about the culture, and like you said, people latching on to 1-2% in those scenarios you described. Like earlier in my career, it was essentially implementing processes to drive higher performance. That was very if you will, kind of tactical. So the best way to achieve sustainable change is by implementing good processes. And I say good meaning like they make sense. They make sense. There's buy-in. There's proper change management around it. And when we talk about culture, even though I have a love-hate relationship with that word, it's now how do we put in operational processes. So it's not the case that you described of 1 to 2% sticking and missing and feeding cynicism and really missing the mark, but processes that are really going to put kind of get everything rowing in the same direction around, overall performance, productivity, the employee experience and their motivation, as well as the customer experience, and getting those all lined up. Like those things can all flow together when you have processes that line up to those.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's probably the real trick, right? Is getting that culture going. And um so now that we've gone off topic a little bit, I'm going to bring us back a
Good.
little bit. So tell me a little bit about Vega Factor, because that's the current company that you're a part of. What can you tell me about that, and how you kind of became involved, and I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, yeah, happy to. Kind of as I touched on earlier, like I just obsessed with performance, and maybe kind of maybe a little hell bent, probably a lot hell bent, like for my days as playing basketball, where I knew like in high school playing on these two basketball teams that like on one team we had all this talent and I significantly underperformed. The team underperformed. Like literally months later, I'm on a different team that was like supposed to not be good at all. It was like a local travel team at the Jersey Shore, and yet like we like outperformed. I outperformed 20%. The team outperformed 20%, and we were like the B team of the Jersey Shore. And what that really kind of tapped into is that it was the environment around us that has a huge impact on our motivation and performance. Like I was the same age, same height, same skills, but in two different environments functioned very differently. And same thing with our teams. One tons of talent underperforming, one on paper should never have won a game and yet ran the table in a state tournament. So it kind of tapped into there's something else here. So as I shared earlier, my journey from kind of implementing change in operational environments, kind of operational excellence type work, to culture transformation work at Great Place to Work. We did some really good work there. Some great models to assess workplace trust in organizations. I was still like, like I saw all these efforts of really well-intentioned efforts for people to improve productivity, culture, in quotes, and the employee experience around the globe. But like people were missing the mark left and right. Like they do maybe like one thing, and then they'd survey again, and their scores would be the same, right? Despite a lot of efforts. And while I saw the work we were doing, and from consulting, I saw some good benefit around it. It wasn't enough. Like we weren't really, we're making some headway, but there was more to be had. So I was restless and just wanting to like, okay, there's more. There's more to be had here. And a recruiter said, "Have you ever heard of Vega Factor?" And this is going back about 9 years now. And I said, "No. Well, check out Prime to Perform, and I think you'd be a great fit there." And next thing you know, I'm reading the book, connected with our co-founders of Vega Factor, Neil Doshi and Lindsay McGregor, the authors of Prime to Perform. And I'm like, this is it. This gets at solving for performance, customer centricity, and the employee experience motivation all in the same way from a very process driven approach. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the gold that where I can kind of join forces and really help people and organizations to achieve that. So that's really my journey to Vega Factor almost nine years ago.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I want to just touch on something, because as you were talking about productivity, I think, as a frontline worker over the years, when management starts talking about productivity, it sometimes elicits almost I guess a negative thought in my mind, like, oh, they're trying to squeeze more blood out of me, right? Like it's and I like when you read Prime to Perform, you understand that productivity, as a result of being excited about what you're working on, and you're in the work becomes the pleasure, is pretty a cool concept. And I think that's kind of like, to me, that feels like a pivotal piece to sort of understand in this whole thing. And maybe this isn't the moment to dig into that, but do you find that the case when you start talking about productivity? Sometimes there's sort of a negative connotation that you're trying to maximize your robots to make sure they all the people become robots and they don't have
Yeah.
any time off.
Yeah, so all the time, Dave, all the time, and it's with good reason because historically, you would go back in the history of kind of industrial engineering and standardized processes was assembly line workers, back in the early auto days, right? It was all about, standardizing processes and essentially maximizing the employee to essentially be a robot, right? And that
Hmm.
mindset of like, how do we control, our people to optimize their productivity and turn them into, robots who do the same things over and over again. And that is very limiting as well as completely demotivating and devaluing, right? But like that mindset is still so prevalent, right? In terms of, how leaders want, this control, they feel pressure to hit their quarterly targets, their sales quotas, et cetera. So they apply pressure and try to, squeeze more and view their people as robots. I'm generalizing, that's not the case in all places, but that's still
Sure.
a prevailing mentality. So it's like, how do a big part of this is to help people understand that there are two types of performance. There's the tactical performance of our work, which is the repeatable, we know this works, follow the play, no need to reinvent the wheel, yet also adaptive performance. How do we create processes and conditions where people deviate from the process to make things better, to get people to think, even frontline workers, to come up with better ways of working and sharing ideas around that and testing things in a very bite-sized way to see if it creates a better customer experience or to see if something can be more efficient versus being waited and told what to do. So we want to create processes for all teams and organizations where that balance exists, and I'm actually flashing to this moment with it was a customer service team and a partner we were working with, and we were working with it was working with the leaders of the customer service operation, big operation, through the front lines. And when we kicked off, like the frontline worker had an idea. It was around, this the limit level before they can like disperse benefits. And the frontline employee, had an idea to basically, change the limit, increase the ceiling for them to disperse funds to people who lost a loved one. It was paying off a death benefit. And this person had this idea, but for so long was never able to share it, or they'd share it. And I call it, would go to the idea cloud and like nothing ever would come of it. And we're able to connect the employee and change the process where now this idea had visibility where they can test it. And I remember we asked the employee, like, well, what would happen if you were able to test this idea? And the employee said, I would have tears of joy if we could actually test it. So,
Wow.
this person, now we kind of changed the process where this idea could come on the table. The VP, like, hey, green light, let's test it out. They tested it out. It was a home run, and they scaled it to thousands of their, colleagues in their customer support operation. And that's an example of like, here's a frontline employee that had like an amazing idea, but it was suppressed for so long. But by now changing the processes, we're getting people at all levels to think along the same lines. Like, how do we do things better? How do we do things to create better experiences for our customer? Now that person's incredibly motivated. They had amazing impact on their customers. Like their idea was scaled to 2,000 people in their organization, and now that person's thinking like they're not just feeling the pressure to be just a cog in the wheel, but now they're like, hey, they're doing their work and thinking at the same time on how it could be even better.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So I don't know. You mentioned in the last comment a little bit about when you were being recruited that you were steered to the book Prime to
Mhm.
Perform. And if anybody's read any of my posts, they know I've talked about this book a number of times. I've read it a few times, listened to it a couple of times. I think there's just so many gems in that book. But maybe you could talk just a little bit about the book. You mentioned Neil and Lindsay as the authors. You know, the book itself, how do you use that as kind of the fundamental tool? Is that something you refer everybody back to? You want to
Yeah,
talk about the
sure.
book just a little bit?
Short
Yeah.
answer is yes, Dave. And it's also that we've continued to kind of build out our technologies and our consulting services to kind of build off those concepts. So whether you're just a small team that wants to improve performance and motivation on your team, we have tools and resources for you to use. Or if you're a team or organization that's looking to kind of go deeper and have a deeper partnership for how you improve your processes or to get executive coaching or leadership development work, we have that as well. So that's kind of our foundation, but we've continued to build our tech and services off of that over the years.
Yeah, cool. So in the book, there's a lot of discussion about total motivation. Seems like kind of almost the center. Everything sort of comes back to the concept of TOMO, total
Yes.
motivation. And so, if you've been in a company where you guys are consulting, TOMO becomes a little bit more of a common term than in other places. So tell me a little bit, if you can sort of give your elevator pitch on total motivation, you know, and we want to steer people to the book because there's so much around it, I'm sure. But when you talk about it to people in general, how do how do you bring that up or talk about it?
Yeah, at a real basic level, it's why we do something determines how well we do it, right? And there are six motives for why we do things, right? The first is play. When we're interested in something, we're engaged in it, we're doing something because we just enjoy it, even if we have like kind of the mean, intense face going because we're analyzing data or coding or something else, but we're interested in something. The second is purpose, and purpose is not the big purpose of the organization. It's when you see how your work matters. So when I shared about that customer service associate sharing that idea and then having it scale to her colleagues and creating great lasting impact for their customers. I mean, that is purpose. Her work mattered, right? Her work mattered. That's the second motive. The third is potential. Potential is when you're doing something now to get to something to somewhere else later on. So maybe I'm not crazy about taking this course, but getting certified in this will open up more doors later on. That's potential. And those three motives, play, purpose, and potential, connect to the work itself. So they're the direct motives. The next three motives are the indirect motives. The first being emotional pressure. So if you're feeling fear, shame, blame, guilt, FOMO, all forms of emotional pressure. The next one is economic pressure, where you're nudged to do things either to gain a reward, to gain praise, or to avoid a consequence. You won't go on the internal company list if you don't do it. And then the last one is inertia. Inertia is when you ask someone, well, why are we doing it this way? And the answer is, well, that's how we've always done it around here. Or I really don't know, right? That's
Yeah,
inertia. It's why I had the ugliest doorknobs you could ever imagine in my previous townhome for like 5-6 years. It was inertia. They were there when I bought the place, and they just stayed there even though they bothered me, right? And so when I shared earlier about adaptive tactical performance, we want to make sure leader processes, organizational processes are getting people to do things more for play, that they're interested in it, purpose, they can learn from the impact of their work, or potential, and decrease the emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia. And by doing that, that increases the capacity to have both tactical performance and adaptive performance.
yeah,
I can go
pretty.
longer, Dave, but that's the short.
Uh, I can only imagine. Yeah, this is probably this could be a whole evening conversation sometime. But yeah, I joke with people. I said as I was like re-listening to this book, I was on the riding mower in their backfield, and I was listening to music. And I don't really like mowing the lawn. It's no secret that for somehow
It's
my
not
whole
play for
life
you.
it's just
It's not play
it's
for you,
just
Dave.
not.
Right?
But this day I was listening to music. I was kind of in the groove, and I was really enjoying myself. I thought, boy, this is kind of I'm just enjoying being out here. And my wife yells something from the deck about how I need to adjust the height of the mower. I'm starting to be micromanaged. I'll say that. And immediately my mood went to I'm really not enjoying this anymore. And I was thinking about the book when that happened. I said, yeah, see, it went from
Yes.
it went from play
Right.
to something a little bit more about emotional pressure, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
uh, so
Yeah.
you when you start to be conscious of it a little bit more, and I noticed it. I've been going to the gym, and I noticed there's some days at the gym where like I'm into the music, I'm kind of pumping weights to the beat. I'm more
Yes.
focused on the rhythm than I am about the weightlifting. I find that it's much easier. I complete more sets, and I'm thinking, wow, this is kind of interesting too. Like it transcends multiple levels, not just work. When you start to
Yes.
see how it all fits in. And I and on one more note, I tell people because this LinkedIn thing I'm doing is really not part of my job, although it kind of parlays into it sometimes. This is a little bit of my play because it's a place where I can kind of be creative and we can do some of these kind of interviews, and I really get expanded on my knowledge of things and learn about people, and it's really exciting to me. So it is a big piece of my play at work.
Good application of the word play, right?
Yeah,
This in itself, you're doing this
yeah,
podcast.
yeah. So thanks, appreciate that. That was good. So I did make a note, and I think you saw this ahead of time. What I really like about the book too is it's not based on some like new science. Really, some of the science, the studies on psychology and how people operate go back there. I've been telling people a few people about that whole study from the 1970s with the phone booth, and
Yep.
somebody drops a folder of papers, and I said it's really kind of interesting how people with a small nudge, they find a coin in the phone
Yes.
booth and it changes the outcome of the study. And then of course that whole, I think that same chapter or paragraph even talks about the recent study with the Monopoly players too, and how it's a completely stacked game on the one player side, but then they ultimately kind of come up with all these reasons why, and it's a little bit more about the blame bias, I think, in that
Yeah.
particular chapter, but it really is interesting that we just don't understand so much of this about how we think. We're not really self-aware enough.
No,
but
no.
but tell me,
But we
yeah,
think
tell me
we
a little
are.
bit about the science. I mean, what do you think? Is this I imagine this is still very progressive. I mean, what's going on with the science behind a lot of this? What do you know about that?
Yeah, it's and Neil Lindsay did a great job, building on a lot of research that was done in the late '60s by Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, and self-determination theory, and really kind of built that out, and not only built it out, but really starting to, okay, well, like how do our processes need to change in our organization and teams to line up to those direct motives, play, purpose, and potential? How do we do things differently to reduce emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia? The irony and paradox is this is, when done well, it increases the intensity people feel in their work because you have everyone thinking at all levels, like how do we make things better? How do we create greater impact? And making sure we're not, like you mentioned, the lawn example. It's a great example. You were in a state of play, and maybe even purpose, because you might have enjoyed like looking at how nicely the lawn looked after, right, and kind of admiring the work a little bit. But very quickly, you felt emotional pressure, right? So you were kind of intense, focused, play, and purpose. So it's really around what I love about the approach is that it's systemic, which for some people it's a little bit more challenging because if there's no magic bullet, you need to work different levels of processes in your team and organization to start reaping the benefits in terms of higher performance, higher customer experience, and better employee experience. And it takes some
Yeah,
work. It takes some work, takes some renovations, if you will.
yeah, I like how the book did talk a little bit about too. If you're like me and you're a frontline employee, like things you can do from your point of view. There's some suggestions to how you can build some of that culture from the bottom, which is kind of nice because not every company is gonna get on board holistically, and so sometimes you can create pockets, right? Pockets of good culture
Yeah.
within a company. Have you seen that happen?
Yeah, Dave, and you really sparked something. So the short answer is yes, on that. It's also your point, like we're all workers, right? We're all workers, whether we're CEO, frontline, whatever. Um, you know, we can influence change in our organization, but at the same time is that there are limits to that, right? We can do things around that, yet there's also limits. What's in our span of control to do that? One area that's to me a kind of a screaming opportunity is how do we manage ourselves in our lives and work around motivation, and it really applies everywhere. I mean, you talk about cutting the lawn, right? Like there's motivation around there. It's how do we spend our time outside of work, and are we doing things that are increasing play, purpose, and potential, or are we overly people pleasing and living a life of a lot of emotional pressure? So there's aspects in our non-work lives. This applies everywhere, and similarly at work, it's the more we are you know, focused on doing things we enjoy, we are taking initiative to learn from the outcomes of that work, we are developing our skills and growing in ways that are interesting and helping propel us to get to where we want to go, the better we'll be more resilient to whatever, as we would say, low tomo, influences that are in our organizations and our lives. It's almost like a I've described it as a three-legged stool, where it's like, how do we manage our own motivation? One, second leg, our team operating model. How's our initial, our primary leader at work and our team operating model, and the third is, the broader organizational operating model. So each one of those legs, the better they are, the more resilient you'll be to the negative influences elsewhere, because they exist, they're real. Like nothing's perfect, but
Yeah.
and so I just want to share that, because that goes a long way to insulating and building that resilience to things that would, kind of tip us into the indirect motives.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and it ties back to the sort of the blame bias in my mind, because as you read the book, you can kind of almost get into the blame game with your own management and say, well, management could do better, right? Management could do better, and you're not really looking at yourself and
Yeah.
saying, hey, what can I do within the freedom I have at work to be more playful with my job? Like, what parts of my work could I mean, some of us have that kind of like flexibility to spend some time on things that, maybe aren't part of our direct, assignment, but we have the time, or we can create the time, we can block off the time. So we, to your point, when we do that, we can, and you probably all worked with somebody who always seemed like they were kind of happy in their job, even in some of
Yeah.
the most miserable circumstances. And probably if you dug in, they figured out a way to view some of it as play, in some way. So
Yeah.
it is kind of an interesting concept what you just described. So a lot of it
Yeah.
is the framework that's sort of built out, but we can create sort of a little bit of a that world of our own just by thinking more about it, by being more
Yes.
mindful about it. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I found that to be the case for me too. And
That's
so,
awesome. That's awesome,
yeah,
Dave. As you kind of share that, it's also, as we think about like how we manage ourselves and motivation at work, regardless of whatever else is going on. A lot of times people can backdoor into the direct motive. So for example, years ago I had a barber who I was kind of asking him his story, and he shared he kind of stumbled into barbering out of inertia. Like he stumbled into it. Like it was completely unintentional, no play, purpose, and potential. And then he remembered, his father had told him. He said, "Well, whatever you do, Tommy, like get good at what you're doing, right? So potential." So he started like learning how to be a good barber. Like he took it seriously. He watched, videos. He experimented with different ways of cutting hair, right? So now he's potential, right? Like I'm going to learn, I'm going to develop myself. Then all of a sudden he started like testing different ways of cutting hair, and people started like, Tommy, I like you as a barber. So now he's seeing the impact of his work. And then he further refines like his approaches and how he cuts hair, and he really enjoys it. So I share that because it's unrealistic for us to think we're going to enjoy all the aspects of our work, right? Like it's just not realistic. But where can we find pockets where we're tapping intentionally within our control, tapping into potential? How can we learn to get better? How can we create space, even if our operating model or team makes it hard, to learn the impact from our internal or external customers and interact with them and learn what's working and what ideas for things to be better? And how can we increase the time that we're finding the work interesting? And
yeah,
taking steps back to think a bit about that.
yeah, yeah. It really is amazing how you can influence a lot of your own sphere. I I constantly have to remind myself. I really like that book, The Seven Habits by Stephen Covey.
Love
That's
it.
one of the famous
Old,
ones, right?
oldie but
And
goodie. Yeah, good one.
my wife's, I'll share some of it with her, and then she's always throwing it back at me. She hasn't read the book, and she's like,
Good.
well, you just said, you're the one that, can, oh, the only thing you can control is your reaction to things. And I'm like, why did I have to tell her about that?
Good.
Now I gotta take my own advice, right? So it is interesting. There's so
Yeah.
much to this that's amazing about our psyche and how it all works, but yeah, a lot to learn.
It's so true, Dave. I find a lot of us, spend a lot of time thinking about things outside of our control, right? So how do we manage our own minds on what can we control or influence and not, and really start kind of conditioning our mind to focus on the controllable, because it's so easy to spin. And like even you, like you mentioned, you're reading Prime to Perform, and you're falling into this, blame. Oh, I wish my leader would do that, or we should, and it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
you could quickly just get into that blame, and
yeah,
I love the blame bias. I like, and I noticed at the end, I think it was at the end of the book, they kind of lay out that isn't like technically the term that's used by the people that discovered sort of the blame
yeah,
bias, but it was renamed for the ease of remember, and I like that. And it even says in the book, once you recognize it, you'll be
oh,
seeing it everywhere, and it
everywhere.
is crazy. It's so evident, and if you're looking at yourself, you see it all the time. There's another book
Yes.
I was reading too, and it was talking about this guy who basically went away on sort of a retreat. He was just having a lot of mental issues, and he basically said he was going to take a whole year, and everything that happened to him in life, he was going to take 100% accountability for, not blame anybody or anything around him. And then he ended up writing a book, I guess, that's famous for psychology, and it's um, that concept. I keep reminding myself of that. Like every time I start getting into these modes where I'm feeling bad about myself or frustrated, I think, okay, I'm not going to blame anyone else. I'm going to start to refocus this back on me. How am I going
Mhm.
to respond to what's happening? It's
Yes.
not,
Great frame.
and it's weird how it does reframe, your thinking. And
Yes. Yeah.
so I'm going to just like go a little bit into a direction here. So when you talk about this concept of motivation, creativity, the total motivation, the direct and the indirect motivators. You know, I've had a couple conversations with people that are telling me, well, not everybody functions the same way, right? Not
Mhm.
everybody works with those same. So, what have you had that conversation? What
Mhm.
would you say to that? Do we pretty much all like male, female? Does everybody kind of work on the same scale, or is it vary depending on different factors?
Yeah, great question, Dave. Well, our research has proven that these motives that we talked about are not created equally. Play is more powerful than purpose, more powerful than potential, and inertia is more destructive than economic pressure, more destructive than emotional pressure. And I've had people, and my colleagues have had people say, well, I have salespeople, and they're just motivated by money, right, or something like that, or we're in the financial services in Wall Street, so we're just motivated, by money. And okay, like money's a driver, right? Great. I think when we kind of take a step back is, you look at some of the best investment professionals out there. Put some hedge fund founders up there. Do you know what they love to do? They love the markets. They love the markets. They love to trade. I was listening to one a couple of weeks ago on Bloomberg. He, co-founder of one of the largest hedge funds in the world, and he was joking. He said, and he's on Bloomberg, and he's talking about when he was a PhD student at Chicago, how like when they would have a few drinks, they would debate, well, what if everybody invested in index funds. It was all the focus on index versus active investing, and they would have this philosophical debate. Well, if everyone did that, wouldn't active be really even more valuable? So, like this is so when people are interested in it, they're going to be better at it. Another frame is would you rather have a loved one? So let's take two people who plan to go to medical school. Okay, so we'll go on a path here. So one person is motivated by money. If I become a doctor, I'll make a decent amount of living, be able to provide the lifestyle I want. And the other one is going into med school both are going in as surgeons to be a surgeon because I'm really interested in, like, I'm fascinated about the heart. I'm fascinated about how it works and the body. That's what I'm really interested in. Both go to med school. Okay, who would you rather have operating on a loved one?
Yeah,
Okay,
number two.
number two, right? Like, no brainer, And maybe
Yeah,
that first person really, I want to make a lot of money and I really want to help people. Okay, like, but I'd still choose number two for my loved one
yeah,
every single time, every single
yep,
time.
yeah, yeah. It's true. Yeah. So It is interesting. I guess I'm really curious over time, like how it does affect different people, these whole concepts of creativity, because that it does seem that some people are a little bit more creative. You used the term early on in this conversation of curiosity. I mean, I think I still have it in my LinkedIn profile, curiosity junkie, because I am like, I do get crazy curious about things. I mean, even doing this podcast, you know, I did a little bit of research. I did a little bit, but it's like everything. I get more curious. Well, what if I change the lighting? What if I use a different camera?
Yeah.
How do I get better audio? I'm like always kind of curious about how to make a change and adjustments. And it seems like anytime I dig into something, I'm just sort of, I'll wake up at night thinking about sometimes like, okay, I could do this, I could do that. But not everybody is quite like that. But there must, I mean, I got to imagine there's different levels of creativity, but maybe it's just like it's in people. It just sometimes isn't awakening. It's like they need to awaken that creativity. I don't know. Have you seen
Yeah,
that?
Dave, it's a great call out you're making around this because like there's I'm flashing where some people, first off, some people may not self-describe as creative. Like I'm not a creative person. I like to code. I like to, whatever it is. So some people might, just initially say I'm not creative. Yet your pointing is a lot is way more nuanced than that. Like you're talking about when people like I'm thinking like, what if I tweak the audio? What if I tried this? And like thinking is natural, right? It's natural. And so many times organizations, leaders, like they squelch people in that. I'm actually flashing to this organization, global organization, incredibly successful, really well educated people. Yet the way they operated, like and super nice people, but the way they operated, it was so command and control, like nice command and control that you had like pretty senior people that all they would do is like do what their leader asked them to do. Like they were so conditioned to not think, to not tinker, right? It's like let's just follow the play, pure tactical performance. And I remember when we first started working with them, one of their senior leaders said to us, I just want our people to think. I want them to think, right? Now, it wasn't that they weren't intelligent people, right? Like just that they'd conditioned their organization to not think, right? So we want to create conditions to get people to think all the things that you're mentioning, whether people deem themselves creative or not. But like, let me think a little bit. That's a form of play. It links to purpose. If I think and tweak something, let me change the audio. Oh, that worked, right? Oh, that's cool. It had impact. Or it didn't work. I learned something, right? Or and potential. Now I'm making something better for later on. So it's a great new, really important nuance that you brought up around thinking and tinkering and the linkages to motivation.
Yeah, I kind of think too, like when this may be like slightly a different thought, but in my mind, I think when someone does get creative or think and they make a change or tweak something, and that's not necessarily, you also use the term recognition. Sometimes there's all this recognition that goes on. But when even just a low level of recognition from a manager about a potential idea and a change, it really gives someone some dignity too. They feel a little bit more important than just the cog in the wheel. So I think there's a piece of that in there too, where as you can feel good about yourself because there's some dignity in the fact that, hey, I had an idea that it is valuable, even if maybe sometimes we have trouble implementing it or making it happen the way you want. At least you know that the idea is like being thought through, and maybe we could figure it out. So
Yeah, Dave, on that theme, it's fascinating around ideas how so often people get conditioned. Okay, like I want ideas, and then all the reasons people don't share ideas, like no one will listen to me. It won't change. I'll be judged adversely. I'm sure we thought of that already. You know, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Too many ideas don't get tested, and what happens is, well, even if I share it and get recognition, if nothing ever becomes of it, then all of a sudden people get conditioned to not share ideas. And I had a moment a few years ago with Neil where I had an idea, and I caught, it was fascinating what I caught myself thinking. I had an idea, it was on something on social media. I anticipated him like having resistance to it. So I kind of went into it like all my logic to persuade him, like kind of like getting in ready for the battle and getting into the game. And I shared my idea with him, and he looked at me and he said, like, why don't you just try it out and see what you learned? And it took all the like, I was like in ready to do this, and it was like, well, he's like, why don't you just try it out and see what happens? Like, and that's what we're trying to create conditions for in the workplace. Like, let's find that line where it's safe to experiment. The world won't end if we try it out, and let's learn from it. But I thought I was thinking about like even how much I had still been conditioned to expect the debate versus, hey, let's just test it. Let's test it. Let's move the idea to bite-sized experiment and see what happens.
Yeah. Isn't that covered in the book? The water line, wasn't there an
Waterline.
illustration about the water
Yes.
line? Yeah, as
Yeah.
long as it doesn't, you're not poking a hole underneath the water line, we're okay.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And is usually, and that's to me a great tie-in around we talk about productivity. Like, if when knowing where that water line is, that means you don't have to go through the bureaucracy. Well, let me check with so and so. Let me check. Happens all the time, and then nothing ever happens. So people then lose that tinkering, thinking, how can I make things better? The irony is getting that water line so that people can turn ideas into experiments quickly. That's both where you see now people thinking, seeing the impact of their ideas, but also better adaptive and tactical performance versus just doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, I know we're getting close to our hour here. What I did want to ask you, I don't know if you had another, because I know you shared a few already, but do you have like a really, some experience that kind of really sticks out with you in a transformation with a group of people, a company, or whoever it is you're consulting, that really stood out as like they went from one end to another of this total motivation spectrum? Or can you share some experience like that you had?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. One is kind of building out on that. The customer service operation for an insurance organization where just so much very successful organization, but just a lot of old school practices. High over tactical performance historically, command and control, and their leadership team just did a great job really sponsoring change all the way from them to the front lines, where it moved to like, let's unlock the best thinking from our people. Let's do that bite-sized experimentation. That's and really just did a great job, transforming their full that part of the organization is one that comes to mind. And it was great to see. I have a passion for unlocking people at all levels, like not just executives, but to see the impact on frontline people and how it was changing their lives and their work. It was just really, really awesome to see. So that's one that comes front and center. Another one is kind of working on helping change an operating model of a sales organization where, again, people, a lot of interestingly, like still some, demotivating processes across the organization. But how does this, 2,000 person sales organization change their processes to drive better sales, better customer experience, and efficiency? And so a lot of change of process to get that organization to change and starting to see the benefits of what's happening to their funnel, how people now are coming up with better ideas, how challenges are getting resolved more quickly. Really, really great to see that and be on the journey for them. At my heart, I'm an implementer. We're helping teams and organizations go from point A to point B. So really love when we can go deeper with our partners to kind of rewire the pipes to start seeing kind of all the benefits of those kinds of changes.
Well, that's pretty cool. This has really been nice, Rich. I kind of knew we didn't talk at length in our first conversation, but I kind of knew the conversation was going to be good. And hearing your background and the sports analogies, all the things that have led you to this point, and I definitely can see how even the play and the purpose really go into what you're doing today for you, as you
Yeah.
just talked about those experiences, right? Because you're really feeling good about changing people's lives, and that's amazing. I think that's pretty exciting. I've kind of had sort of a similar view of my own journey through sales, is that most of the time I think, you know, there's a lot of technology that we've been involved with, like bringing to the fore with customers. And, you know, Everybody looks at the sales guys. You're just looking at selling something. But I always like to think about, hey, the technology really can be advantageous. And a lot of times, you're busy doing it the way you always did it. And the sales, it's that old analogy of the guy, the guy that's at the door of the tent with the machine gun. And the guy's like, no, we don't have time for that. Well, he's like sharpening the swords or whatever for the battle. And, sometimes it's just realizing that for me, the purpose and the play in sales is, hey, I'm going to go and dig and find those technologies that I think are exciting, and I'm going to bring those to the forward for my customers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we might have a lot of Me Too products. There might be a lot of things that, we could supply too. But what I'm going to spend my time with when I'm coming to you, if you tell me what you're challenged with, I'm going to go dig and find what I can solve that with. That's where the fun comes in for me. And how that grows in sales, hopefully it grows for both of us and helps both of us,
Yeah.
right? And so I've never really looked at it as just product pushing. I'm always trying to figure out like how we can solve a problem together. And that's been the fun in my career in sales. I love that part.
That's
So
awesome, Dave. Yeah, and it's also thinking about the linkages with you, like almost resisting any pressures to just push product and sell things, but what does the customer need? And kind of enjoying thinking through how to problem solve that for the customer, right? I mean, that's such a great link of kind of encapsulating what we're talking around motives, being resistant to any pressures that might exist, elsewhere, and doing what's right for the customer at the same time.
yeah, so the funny part about that too is sometimes in my career, companies have tried to come up with they use a lot of times they use the term playbook, right?
Yep.
And one of the things I sort of can't stand is this like playbook where you go to your customer and like, what keeps you up at night? And, what are your main, and it like never lands right. Cause they kind of know it's like almost like you're reading the script, even
Yep.
if you're not reading it. Right.
Yep.
And what I always find is that, okay, like have a conversation. I may bring up a couple of what I think are like cool technology, something unique that I've seen in a portfolio of products that I never saw before. I'm like, hey, have you ever seen this? Because to me, it looked pretty exciting. Have you ever? And it's always those conversations. They may not be interested in what you just said, but then those conversations always tend to like trickle down to like, no, but I am having an issue with this. And you're like, oh, okay. So it's funny how you don't take the direct path, but a lot of times by just sharing something of interest,
Yep.
you end up getting there anyway. And so I don't know. And there again is the play, right? I find
Yes.
that there's learning from that interchange and realizing that okay, this is how you approach something. And so yeah, it's sales is definitely not tactical. I think
Yeah.
anytime you try to take a sales role and put a tactical flavor to it, it really gets difficult.
Great point, and so true, right? And so true. And there's a lot of pressure. So you throw on too much tactical and pressure, that's eroding the adaptive performance and higher skills people need to be applying in sales.
Yeah,
100% correct.
yeah. I've been rewatching the episodes of The Office at the gym, and there was the one where Michael goes to work at night at the call center, and the guy's like, read the script,
Right.
make the sale. It's real simple. Just make the call, read the script, make the sale. Like that's all it's on the
Yes.
whiteboard.
Yeah. And
It's like
also, frankly,
okay,
from a leader perspective, like that doesn't take any skill to do that. You're eroding performance, and like
yeah,
there's no need for that as a leader, for you to write that on a board.
that's right. And I chuckled with that one. So anyway, well, hey, anything else you want to share before we wrap it up about Vega Factor and how to get in touch with you, or should people just reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, reach out on LinkedIn. You could also go to our website at vegafactor.com, and always look forward to connecting with people and helping people thrive at work. So appreciate it, Dave. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome, and thanks. And I will put the link to Vega Factor in the posts when I go ahead and post this on LinkedIn. So thank you so much for joining me. It was really really great conversation. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it.
My
So
pleasure. All play and purpose, Dave. Thank
that's
you.
right.
All right. Take care.